Thanks, Barb. Yeah, I'll just take 2 seconds here. I know I sent Barb and Shane a message, just reminded the CGI team. I think it's helpful for the whole team. As we teach or do these knowledge transfer sessions, we're going to really teach and talk from the new solution perspective versus starting at the old solution or the current solution and trying to draw a straight line to the new. That'll help you guys in the long run and avoid some frustrations. We also will teach from a business process perspective for how do we do and support this business process and new solution, and show you the steps to do that. They're not always going to match the steps that you did in the old solution. So that's why we're not going to start that way. An easy example is the business process is how do I maintain addresses for an organization, right? We'll show you how to do that in the new solution. We're not going to show you or expect, hey, in the current solution, I use bulk load to maintain an address. Show me how I use bulk load to maintain an address in a new solution, right? That would be a mistake because we're not doing that way. I think it'll be easier for folks if we focus on the new, how we do it in the new, and then ask the questions around certain things and processes as we go. So with that, I'll kick it to John. I'll turn my camera off. Barb, if you need anything in particular, just text me. That way you guys can stare at John. Just know for Barb and folks in the room, we can see all of you, but you're really small, so we can't see if you raise it. We can't see an expression or a face. Can't see you waving your hands. So use the chat or do something else. We can't really do a whole lot.
We request that everyone remember us as tiny.
All right, John.
Cool. All right, well, let's get started. So today we're going to talk about organizational setup, how we're doing it, and even next. From that, once we have our organization set up, we can set up our chart of accounts, which are the accounting fields available for the new agency that we've created. Once we have our new fields, then we have our field data, our addresses, and then we start to add users that have access to that new organization. And then within that, we'll create some P cards, maybe create some very simple workflow steps, very easy and hopefully much more intuitive than our current signer rule method. And then we'll log in and create a requisition. So before I kind of kick off with the organization, I just want to talk a little bit about where we are and what we're talking about within even next. So when I talk about organization, we're talking about at a requisition or a contract or a sourcing document, any of those things. What organization are you buying for at the basic core level? And we kind of took a step back when we got into even next and thought, how can we make this more intuitive, help make it a little easier, and hopefully make a lot more sense moving forward with our next, even next contract, and really hopefully making a better solution overall. On the requisition header, you'll see we actually default to something that's you guys are very familiar with. It's the Bison's org name, which is now called a site. This site belongs to a hierarchy, which I will go through in a moment, but I kind of wanted to set the stage with what this really drives. So when I create my requisition and I click save the first time, a lot of things are happening in the background. It's building what my accounting values are that are available, whether they're required or not required. It's building the data behind them so that the data, when you pick a drop down, is based on the organization that you're in, which really drives that same kind of multifaceted view that we have today with different entities and their data. And really, it is the power behind the solution, right? It allows us to have 1,200, 1,300, 1,500 agencies with completely different data, completely different rules. But when they come into their system and they create a requisition, it looks and feels like theirs. So really, I want to just kind of talk about that so we can start with this organization is the Bison's org today that is now called the site, or as I'm about to show you in this tree, the organization level. So at a very basic level within iValue and within the EVA Next solution. Every user must have an organization assigned to them. Organization is also a site. I'm sorry, I'm going to use these interchangeably because effectively that's what they are. But really, this is a BISense org in today's world. So everyone from conversion, when you look at someone's organization, you're going to see them assigned to this level. Now, from that, we've added a lot more levels up, as you can tell. Today, if you want to visualize, I can come in here. Our highest level is EVA wide, EVA 001. For those of you who are familiar, it should seem very familiar. I know you've probably seen it 1,000 different places, but never actually changed it because really everything is within EVA 001. Now, what we've done is we've actually added a few more levels here outside of the current organizational structure. So enterprise is EVA 001. Entity is our client names as they exist today. So, you know, your A194, your A136, those are all here. And as I mentioned, organization are our BISense orgs. So we've actually added a few more levels here, as you can see, with very generic names so that it will work for anybody, but enterprise subgroup, entity group, and sub-entity. Now, when I come into this view of those individual organizational structures, you'll kind of see what we're doing and how we're organizing this data. So at the highest level, we have our EVA wide, and then you can see we start to get into secretariats. So we've got all of our different secretariats. We've got, if there's some kind of testing, some of our test agencies. But really, this is kind of the roll-up that we do a lot within reporting. We're now doing organizationally within the solution. So that way we can tie things together and logically they fit together much more cleanly. So if I expand another level down, you can see we'll have a repeat. Now I know this from a conversion standpoint, it will be confusing starting out, and I apologize for that because I am the one that helped with this design a lot. But really the idea here is this gives us another level to be able to group things. So in our example of, let's say, Department of Corrections, in theory, under, let's see, we've got public safety, right? So we could put them actually at this higher level, as you can see here with corrections. And then public safety is its own different. And this allows us to add another layer, right? So they're all under public safety. So if you want to report and know, then you're good to go. But for corrections, you're going to go one level down. So we get our first kind of logical split for most of these secretariats. For administration, there is only one. We don't have a split at this point. So you're just going to get a repeat down one more level because something needs to be here. This next level should look very familiar to most of you. This is the entity level. In the background, it's called ACT. But this is where you start to get your A196, your A170, E194 or E136. All of these should seem fairly familiar and hopefully starting to look a little bit more what you guys are used to. So we'll open up Department of General Services, and you'll see we have another level underneath here. Now, again, this is going to be repeated for anybody that doesn't need it. But what this allows us to do is take VCCS, for example. You could have shared service at the entity level, and then at the sub-entity, you could have all of your community colleges and organize it in that way. With conversion and moving from our current system into the new system, we were somewhat kind of, I don't want to say stuck, but we didn't want to make a lot of transitions before day one. But moving forward, hopefully you guys can see some of the flexibility that we have now when we're talking to new agencies, talking to new clients, to be able to really build this organizational structure to work for them as opposed to them adhering to what we have. So lastly, I'm going to pop this out. And for those of you who have ever messed with Bisense orgs, all of these should look very familiar. These are all site level, as I called, and they're all of the Bisense orgs within A194 listed. And I believe this is a current cut of production. So this is actually all of A194's Bisense orgs in UAT. So I know that was a lot. So I'm going to kind of take a step back real quick, and we're going to walk through it kind of at this view too. So my original and first point was each user needs to have an organization. So an organization is this site level. This is what drives the user's rules and data when they create their requisition. So this right here is a site. If a user does not have a value here, when they create a requisition, this will be blank and they can't actually save a requisition. So the biggest takeaway I can say is when you're creating users and when we're creating agencies, everyone has to have at least one site. So if we're creating a brand new agency from scratch, we have to move from the top down and start filling in as we need new things. So for today's demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a new agency within administration. And I'm going to take you guys through that step. And then once we add our new entity, we're going to add our sub entity, and then we're going to add a site, which then effectively you have now created a brand new agency that we can start setting up the chart of accounts, field data, addresses, etc. So I'm sure there are a lot of heads spinning, but hopefully we can start moving through and you guys will start to see a little bit how easy this is. I do want to kind of kick off to this level view that you're looking at right now is actually an administrative view of the world. If you are looking as an admin in UAT, you guys can see the same thing I'm looking at. Otherwise, to be able to see something similar to this, you would actually go to create a user. And I can kind of show you guys real quick. Create a new user, and on the left-hand side, there's a org perimeter. And this is going to build the same tree that we were just looking at in my view. But this is how you would actually assign them to an individual user. Now, for process-wise, I believe for day one, and at least to kind of start, we will be, and we being CGI, will probably be the ones to actually create your specific organizations, or at least be there to help you throughout the way. But the access to these tables is based on profiles. So what I'm looking at is a high-level view to tell me, okay, for entity, which is the first table I'm going to update, I can just click right here on this entity link and it'll take me right to the table I need to be at without having to know I need to go to the T-org act table, for instance. So it's just an easy way to kind of move around. And I'm not sure if I should be asking questions at this point, but Barb, from a high level, we're still thinking to start at the agency setup level, it will most likely be CGI either doing or assisting. And then everything else should be able to be done within the UI. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure I was talking to that correctly. All right. So when you're thinking about a new agency, you want to think about what their agency code is. So in this case, I'm going to make I'm going to add an extra digit just to make it more confusing. And I'm going to call it John. And I'm going to call this John's demo agency. We'll call it entity just so that it matches. And again, this is what CGI will be doing primarily to set this up, but it's good to see the options that we have here so you can provide this information in an AR moving forward. But really, you can see it's very simple, right? What's the unique name? What's the label? We don't need to worry about import line or import ID because that's only used for when we're bringing in something with conversion or with an ETL. And then this is a pretty important part. This is really what drives our purchase order terms and conditions by entity. So today, some of you may be familiar with pre-printed text. This is the same concept, except it's applied at the entity level. So anybody that creates a requisition underneath this new entity will have this custom purchase order terms and conditions. We see that a lot with all of our schools and universities that have their own terms and conditions, where everybody else who, if you leave this blank, will get a standard EVA terms and conditions, which you are all hopefully pretty familiar with. So for now, we'll leave this blank. And the last piece is really defining what the level above is. So this is what kind of builds that tree structure. So as I mentioned, I'm going to create this under administration. As you can see, fairly minimal data, not a lot that needs to be filled out. I'll go ahead and come back to my data screen and refresh, and we'll kind of take you through as each new piece is added, and hopefully it will help kind of build the understanding. So you can see right here, we've got John's demo entity. If I click the expand, I don't have anything under that. Sorry, I play with a 2-year-old too much at home. I say way too often. So next up under entity is our sub entity. So I'm going to do the exact same process where I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a sub entity. I prefer to create with the create button as opposed to adding a line. I'm going to call this one just John. We're going to call this John sub ent. And then we're going to say, this is the level above. As I mentioned before, our status is always going to be valid in this case. And that's really all I need to do. Again, what's my unique identifier? What's the name of my entity? And then what's the level above and the fact that the status. We do have some capability at really every level of the organization to set a default currency. Really, I think the only people that used that in the past was VCU, which I know they don't really use it as much anymore. But we do have that flexibility if in the future we do have organizations that maybe don't have the US dollar as their standard. So as I said, I'm going to come back and we're going to see as we build this tree structure. If I come into here, you'll see now I have my sub entity. And again, we'll go with we still need one level below it. And that's going to be our organization. Now, sites have a lot more details that need to be added for them. The reason being is we took this time to really look at how organizations use their sites and drive a lot of workflow and business logic decisions off of the site level, as opposed to being a mix of site and entity. And what I mean by that is things like PO integration. The way that we had to do it in the past was your entire entity set up for PO integration? If so, it had to be set at the entity. And then the BISense orgs were the ones that actually set the threshold. Now, what we've done instead is said, okay, instead of it being in 2 different places, let's put everything at the site, which then gives the site level flexibility to say one site requires integration, for instance, while another site may not, or one site requires PO integration, while the other may only be order, or vice versa. So it really will give us a lot of flexibility moving forward. And I think it's a pretty powerful. Add it to EVA wide. This really is a necessary piece just to link everything in. There's only ever one answer, so every site will belong to EVA wide. So as we're creating this, CGI will know that, and we'll continue to do it that way. Vision, subvent. So this is building that tree, and then here are really the pieces that you can set at the site level that I was kind of talking to. So requisition integration, you can either turn on or off for the site, and then you set the threshold. Same thing with purchase order integration, and then you set the threshold. Central receiving, we're really not using. If I'm honest, we had it because we thought when we did the initial design that we needed it, but really we don't with the way I value central receiving is done. Because of the searchability, you actually apply a profile to a user, and that allows them to centrally receive. It's not the same thing as kind of in the past with EVA. You had to define a specific person or a group that had to do the action. Now you can give people access to just centrally receive for what they should be receiving. So hopefully that will make that process easier. Receive by amount is a piece that we had at the entity level as well. This allowed entities to be able to receive by amount. From the EVA Next standpoint, what we're doing is we're defining a rule when you're receiving. If you try to receive by amount when this value is no, you will get an error on the receipt. You can't receive that way. You can only receive by quantity. But if this was yes, then you can receive by amount. So for those who will work with agencies where they do not allow receiving by amount for various reasons, integration, I think for a lot of people balks at the idea of receiving by amount in some cases. This is where we kind of set that level. And last but not least is queue manager. This is really only touching, let's see, probably if you include all of VCCS as one organization, probably about 5 different organizations that some of you may or may not be familiar with. I'll talk a lot more about the functionality of queue manager at later, but the idea behind it is you define at the site level whether or not a manager, a queue manager, let's say of buyers, so a group of buyers need to review for this site. I know today it's not as widely used as I think we initially hoped when we got that into EVA. I hope moving forward for business reasons, I think queue manager makes an incredible amount of sense to allow, a group of buyers to be able to review information in a collaborative way. But this is what would trigger in the workflow that the queue manager group would need to review it. So I know I went through a lot. Again, at a basic level, if you have nothing, no integration, no receive by amount, no queue manager, it's very simple, right? We've got the name of the site, the label that you see on the UI, the fact that it's valid, and then who its parent in the tree is. So go ahead and save that, and then we'll take a look at our tree, and hopefully we've got everything updated. John's demo. Boom. All right, so we've got our site level organization now. So at a very basic level, I can now have a user associated to a site. But I'm sure a lot of you in your heads are thinking, but what about the address that's a required field? What about the chart of accounts or the field data for those chart of accounts? All of that information we still need to set up. But this is the very basic core. Now you have an organizational structure to work with, and you can start really going in and working in kind of the newer version of the user management, data management module within iValue. So before I kind of kick into that, I guess we're not doing questions, so I guess I'll just keep moving into the next one. Sorry, I'm kind of used to asking questions along the way. All right, so let me kind of take a step back. Next up, we're going to talk about setting up the chart of accounts. So this is done in the new Manage dropdown. You guys may or may not be familiar with this. It is very new within the last couple of weeks. We have added it as part of the UMDM kind of refresh effort to make sure everything is together in one nice new place. What we're going to focus on first is this chart of accounts data. So what this allows us to do is this allows us to define for a given organization what fields they see in their allocation area. Now, you guys as AEs or administrators will have access to this. So everything that I'm doing from here on out is actually for you guys. You guys can do all of this. You don't need, I'm sure we can help CGI, especially walking through the first time and, making sure everything is set up correctly. But you will have access to do this in UAT, to be able to play, maybe do a test drive. You could email me or do like a basic AR, and I can, create everybody their own little organization to kind of play in, kind of depending on what you guys are working on. But we're going to start out with filling our required fields out. So I'm going to stick with my John name, so that way when everything breaks, it's my fault. And then we're going to look at our entities. So when I do the keyword search here, you'll see we got John's demo entity. I'm going to just call this John's COA. And at a very basic level, this is the first step for what we need. So we've got what's the unique identifier, which you can kind of see in the background. For anything that's converted in, should probably keep it the same way. For anything that's converted in, it's the agency code _COA. We're associating it to an entity, and then we're giving it a name, which again, for conversion purposes, I think we just did the entity name and then space COA. This is where we start to really configure what fields are available. So when we click this drop down, you'll see a nice long list. I'm actually going to go into the see all so we can choose a few kind of on the fly. But a lot of these should hopefully sound fairly familiar. We got our cardinal asset, cardinal department, cost center, FIPS, fiscal year, etc. But I'm going to start with something very important, that no matter what, you always have to have the organization added to the COA. Now you're probably thinking, what if my group doesn't use organization? It's a very good question. It is not an organization in the standpoint of field data associated with kind of an organization accounting field. It's actually organization as in organization what we just created. So when you're creating a requisition, this field is going to show the site that's chosen at the header level of the requisition. For the logic to work, this field has to be there. This always has to be available no matter what. It doesn't matter if it's required or not, because it is required effectively. It will always be populated. There's no way to null it out or to leave it blank. But no matter what, we need to have organization. That's the no matter what's. The next step is fiscal year. Now, today we have fiscal year at the header level, which has some pros and some cons. The con is if you have multiple line items that you're purchasing off of multiple fiscal years, you had to create different requisitions. The pro now is this is at the line level within the allocations, and now fiscal year is something that can be set up at the line level. The downside is when you have 50 lines, fiscal year is something that needs to be populated for those 50 lines. So some pros, some cons, but where it is now is within this allocation. And if you scroll through this list kind of that you see in the background, you'll see from a conversion standpoint, everybody has at least organization and fiscal year. So that's kind of the base level. So I'm going to save this first. And for us to really kind of manage this page, you're going to be doing a lot of the save action as opposed to the save and close, because a refresh happens when you save. And this is where we set things to be required or not required. So I'm going to go ahead and make fiscal year required in this piece. And we're going to go in and we're just going to pick, let's say, cardinal cost center as our other field. So again, when I save, you'll see now cardinal cost center. I can make it required or not required. In this case, I'm going to leave it as not required. And we're going to add some data to it here in a little bit. So hopefully you guys can see there's a lot of flexibility. If in some case, when you're coming in here and you're looking for a field that doesn't have the name you're expecting it to have, or the agency is requesting something, and let me just make this grid a little bigger so we can just look at the full list, requesting something that doesn't exist. We have a few kind of generically named fields, agency use 1, agency use 2. From a conversion standpoint, the only thing, I think there were 5 or 6 different agencies that required this kind of extra field, but they were named very different things across the 6 agencies. So from a stand-up, we wanted to give people the flexibility to have their kind of agency use. These are pretty powerful if you run into a situation where, let's say you have a allocation that is not standard in the sense of something that's in this list. The reason why we needed to do things in this list is I value a specific thing. We can add more later, but just for the initial stand up, this is our allocation levels as they exist today. So they kind of have to fit within this box. But hopefully most will, and then agency use will give you that flexibility if you need to moving forward. Go ahead and close this. And then we'll save and close. And at this point, we have now created our chart of accounts. So if I go here and I go to John's demo entity, this is kind of, I'll show you guys a little bit how you can search and move around this browse page if you're not familiar. Most pages within Even Next and iValua, you'll see is very similar, very easy to move around. We've tried to add very helpful searches to these pages so that you can get to the information you need right away. And with that, we have some nice flexibility and some pieces that we've added. So if you, for instance, the sites that belong to this COA. So when you create a requisition, you pick a site. When you pick, let's say, John's site, this is your COA. So we tried our best to map things visually from the UI to be able to look and like, let me pull up a big one. Let's do services. So if I look up general services, for instance, this list is going to be very long, right? Because this is every site associated to this COA. But it allows us the flexibility to debug a little bit. When you're creating a requisition under A194 DO Human Resources, you should be able to come back and look at the COA, and now you can look at sources, A194. So now instead of looking by entity, I can actually look by site, and that will pull up my entity. So it gives you a variation of ways to look up for the information that you need. Additionally, we have allocation levels. If you wanted to look at everybody that has, I don't know, cardinal cost code turned on, for instance, you could do that as well. But at a basic level, that's really it. You've now set up, this is similar to what you guys do today, where you turn on data or you turn on your fields to be able to have data loaded for them. So the next step is actually adding data to it. Now within UAT, you guys do not have the newest piece. And I think that's coming this week or very, very soon. So let me just hop into system test real quick so I can show you what you can expect to see. In that manage screen, in that same area, we're going to have this maintain COA elements. And you'll see here, this is the list of every COA option. Now, as an administrator, I see all of them. If you have a user or if you guys are set up as a data manager, you will only see COAs, or sorry, you will only see fields that match the agencies that you're assigned to. So if you're assigned to, let's say, DGS, you will only see account, activity, cost center, customer, fiscal year, or not fiscal year, because that's a whatever, fund, project allocation. So you will only see those options. And if you need to edit them, it's as easy as clicking in here. This page pre-filters based on the organization access that you have. And it's as easy as coming in and just clicking add a new allocation where we can use a code. You choose the organization that you want to assign it to, a label, and a value. And then you save. You can do save and new, or you can go back to browsing. Every single one of these pages is set up the exact same way. So I'll go back to here. So if I go to Cardinal account, it will look and feel the exact same way, no matter what you're working on. So it should hopefully feel very nice. Unfortunately, that is not in UAT yet. So I'm going to go through and create at least one piece of data within UAT for you guys, so we can kind of continue with the overall demo. And let me go here. I apologize for the clicking around, but I forgot which. There we go, Cardinal Cost Center. So as an administrator, this is kind of our view into the back end, if you will. Really access to the database itself in a lot of ways. So in this case, I'm going to my view of this cost center table, which, as you can see, is fairly close, fairly similar, except now you don't have to fill out with a lot of extra fields that maybe you don't know the answers to. We've got a much simpler piece here. So we're going to call this, which one was this? We'll call this John. And then we're going to call it John. Here, we're going to set it up at the entity, John's cost center. We have a few fields to fill out here. Again, from the view that you guys will have, you will not have to deal with any of this. Just so we can see the difference. And I believe we need to set it to valid. A lot of this stuff is done for you within the system or what's coming into UAT. But I did want to just add at least one so we can kind of see how that works. All right. So now that we have one piece of field data added, next up is to start to create our addresses. So as you guys know, we have to have at least per entity, one ship to and one bill to. Otherwise, when you try to save a requisition for the first time, it will yell at you and say, hey, I don't know what my ship to and bill to is. So in this case, we're going to create an address. This is kind of back into what you guys will be able to see and do completely on your own without any of our help. You search for your organization and you start to add details. You have the ability to add an email. And we will choose whether it's a bill to or a ship to. So we'll start off with our bill to. If your agencies use ERP address ID, this is really for order import and export agencies. VDOT uses this a lot. It really is what ties kind of those external orders to an address. Most of you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, and it's completely fine. But we do have the ability to have this added here. As we scroll down, you'll see we get this nice little Google-like address. So 8 Main Street, Richmond, Virginia. And you'll see it pops up on a view for you so you can see. We'll add a little label called bill to. We can add any additional information as needed onto the one that was added automatically. And we've created our bill to. Pretty easy. We'll go on to our ship to next. And we don't need to fill that out. For ship to, we're actually going to go to the same address. Save and close. So now that we've added these addresses, when you come to this manage addresses page, it's going to work the same way that I mentioned the COA will work. You will only be able to see the organizations that you have assigned to you to be able to navigate through. So in this case, because I'm an admin, I can see everything. So we'll go to a demo entity, and you can see here I've got my bill to, and I forgot to give this one a label. It's a good easy way to review what you've added for exactly the reason I just did. And we'll research to just refresh our page. We get our bill to and our ship to. Pretty easy. All right. So next up, as you guys kind of may have hopefully realized at this point, we have enough to actually create a user now. We have our site level to be able to assign to our user. We have our ship to and bill to when we're creating our requisition. We have our COA set up and at least one piece of data in the field that we turned on, which was that cardinal cost center. So next up, we're going to head to our users under manage, and we're going to start to create a new user. So in this case, we're going to keep them fairly basic. We're going to make them a requisitioner and an employee. We're going to do a little different names so that I don't get confused when I do this incorrectly. Here, you can add additional information such as phone, cell phone, fax. If they do have a personal address, they can add that here. That is not their ship to or bill to addresses. That will come in here in a moment. The next step, and this is the most important step in my opinion, before you click save the first time, you want to come to this Orga perimeter page. And you want to expand down to the level that you need. And this is just my personal preference so that I remember to do it correctly. But no matter what, you have to have a user set up at the site. So you always want to start at the lowest, and then you kind of work your way up. And the system does a good job of highlighting what you're checking as you move up. The idea behind this and the reason why it's important is if you have contracts, is the easiest example, that are EVA-wide contracts. If I uncheck this box, this user will not be able to purchase off of EVA-wide contracts. However, if I check this box, they will be able to see it and be able to purchase off it just as much as they need to. Now, this gives even more flexibility if you start thinking of other use cases where, you know, if you need access to be able, or maybe you don't want a user to have access to buy off of EVA-wide, you would just uncheck this box. So that really comes down kind of to Mark's point originally of getting back to the what is the business reason for setting someone up? What do they need? How do we kind of help get entities and agencies back to using the system to work for them, as opposed to them conforming to work with the system? So once we've added our organizations, I'm going to go ahead and save one time, because what this will allow us to do is it will say, okay, now I have my organizational perimeter set. When I come to this user preferences tab, it will allow me to choose a main organization, which in this case, the only site that I have, the lowest level, so by sense org in today's world, is right here. I can also set up defaults. Now, as an admin, I had that full list. As a non-admin, you guys will not have the full list. You'll only have what's available to that user. But let me grab our bill to and ship to. Now, within the user, we have some other things that I do want to talk to, and this looks a little wonky. I'll need to look at the organization of this page after this meeting. But we do have some user level approvals that you guys are probably pretty familiar with, that we have now put onto the user page itself. So we have expenditure limit and quick quote. So expenditure limit, as you guys know, is fairly simple. Who is your approver? What's the threshold? So if your threshold 0 and my approver is, let's say Shane, it's as easy as adding that in. In this case, I'm going to leave this blank, close this, get rid of that. If your user requires quick quote approval, for the previous quick quote setup, what we did was we had a basic, you require approval, similar concept, except now we're picking a user, same thing, right? You pick a user to approve my quick quote. So this is for maybe the junior buyers that they're not as comfortable with being able to put quick quotes out on the street. They need someone to review it before it goes out. It's kind of the use case behind that. Additionally, as an administrator, we have the ability to do delegation for users. Let's say I'm out of town. We can give my workflow tasks to, let's say, Barb to be able to handle while I'm out. Workflow tasks is different than my private access, because workflow tasks is you never really need to log in as that user. So let's say Barb is only just going to review any requisitions that come in for my approval. That will all be done kind of at this level right here. For private access, that's if, let's say I'm out for a month and someone needs to create requisitions or log into my part to be able to work as me for whatever reason. That would be the private access option. So we have some nice options here. Again, we're cleaning up a lot of this. I think in even the next UAT, you'll see these in a little bit different order. But the last thing that you guys are probably familiar with is this Logi access. I'm going to go ahead and just give this user and all entity for now. Because I know it's going to yell at me. I know there's a bug out there, but this should look fairly familiar for anybody who's worked in user management today. It's the same drop downs, same information. And you can give all the other roles with scheduler and things like that in here. So I've created my user. Woohoo! So now we're going to log in as them and see how it works. Oh, I need to add this to UAT. So this is going to be the general terms and condition. There's a file missing that I need to add, but this will be the full EVA terms that you guys are used to seeing. The first time user logs in, they'll have to accept the terms and acknowledge. It also gives them the ability to print. But you can see here, very simple view as a requisitioner. I have the ability to look at suppliers, browse contracts, search, create requisitions. So we're going to start off by creating a requisition. You can see my site was put right in here, no problem. Put in PO category, energy performance. Let's do the test rec. We'll go ahead and save. Because we did everything in advance, our bill to and ship to are going to populate with no problem. I'm actually going to head back to the catalog real quick. So just grab an item real quick. You can just as easily add a non-catalog item, which might be what I do because it looks like we converted a lot of these in. Yeah, I'm going to go back to my requisition. Add a non-catalog right there too. But we're going to add just a line, very, very simple. If you have a delivered to information at the line level, you can add that here. You pick your supplier. And then we're going to go ahead and save. Now, the first save on a non-catalog item is what builds and shows your allocations. So you can see here, we've got 100% for $1. Fiscal year, if you remember, we required. Just going to do 2020, even though I know that's not the year. Cost center, if you guys remember, I added the 8 John 8 cost center. Accounting cross-reference is going to show in every allocation grid. It's just a free text field if somebody needs to use it for any kind of reference information. And the last field is that organization. So this is what I mentioned is the driving force for this entire grid. If this field is not here, I'll reiterate, none of this will work. You'll see these fields when you click the drop down, you're going to get a whole long list of absolutely everything in the system. And then it will throw many, many errors at you, telling you that you don't have access to do what you're doing. So again, organization, when you're setting up COA, very important. It's what drives everything and filters effectively this whole grid. So these were our three, if you guys remember. Save and close. And at a very basic level, we have created an agency, added addresses, set up the COA, added field data, and created a requisition, all within an hour or so. And that was, I'm sure it could be done faster if needed. The next thing I kind of want to talk about is P cards. For those of you who are not familiar with the way P cards are working in Even Next, every user will have access to add their own P cards. So I'll go ahead and save this requisition, and we're going to just go create a P card real quick. In the drop down on the top right, you'll click on My Profile. When we scroll down, you'll see a lot of the things that look very familiar to you guys from what we just saw on the user management side. This allows the users to manage their own information. as needed. I guess deliver to is required. Deliver to me. And then we're gonna save this. We're gonna add a P card. We'll kind of show you guys how easy it is to add a P card into the system. So let's say John's Amex. John Kaplan. Let me go ahead and put in my correct card number so you guys can all steal my information. March 2024, let's say. So the basic information you fill out on any card. When you come into here, you can refresh this page and you'll see the P card information has been added. In the background, what's happening is this is actually working with a service to encrypt the card number. So if you ever need to edit the card or do anything to the card, the only way to do that is to delete it and add a new one. And that's from a security standpoint, it's much safer. In general, there aren't a lot of things you probably need to edit other than maybe the label. But from a kind of confidentiality security standpoint, instead of allowing people to come in and kind of re-verify their number and go through all those steps, we just say go ahead and delete and add another. Because at the end of the day, as you saw, very simple to do. So if I go back into my requisition and I head to P cards, I now have a P card that I can apply to this requisition in the matter of 30 seconds that it took me to go do that. As opposed to today's process, which I think is an overnight cycle. You add it to portal and go through all that. So a lot of things with the requisition and the data behind it has been simplified and really should be hopefully a lot more powerful. Let's see what the next piece is that I wanted to talk about. So let's talk about editing the COA a little bit. So as you guys saw, we had back in my admin. We had Cardinal Cost Center was our only field that we turned on. So in some cases, maybe there's a situation where you need to turn on more, or there's a new piece that needs to be added. So we would head back to our managed chart of accounts data. We would go to our John entity and we could just edit it. So in this case, let's say I want to add, let's do Cardinal Agency Use one, very generic one. And let's say I'm going to leave it optional for now, but I could make it required here as well. So I'll save and we'll kind of go through the same steps. We'll go into our user. We'll head back to John. Log in as them. Head back to my requisition. This is actually a good test. Edit. You can see I have it turned on. Obviously, when I click this drop down, I haven't added any data for it, but you can see how quickly, even from a test standpoint, when you're setting up an agency in UAT, for instance, instead of having to do something and wait overnight to make sure you did it right, it's instantaneous. You can go from one to the next and really be able to test this quickly without having to do a lot of, oh, well, I messed up today, which puts me a day late. And then if you mess up the next day, then it's 2 days late, and just, it adds a lot on. So hopefully this is a much smoother process than what we have to do today. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is rules, but I know we just went through a lot. I don't know if this is a kind of logical breaking point to maybe ask questions before we get into rules. And then after a break, we'll jump into rules. Does that make sense, Barb?
Yeah, that's good, John. Oh, I see a question down here in the front. All right. Oh, my goodness. Would you like to ask these yourself?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Set that
You
board.
can't read my writing?
No, this is really good. She jammed 5 questions on this one. 7. Oh, my goodness. I missed the one on the back.
Okay, this is Kimberly.
Hello.
So are the allocations set at the org level? I think the answer is yes. And are they available for all sites within that org?
They're set at the entity level. And yes, all sites within that entity. So think of like A194 as an entity, and then all sites belong to that entity.
I thought they were an organization. I've got the
A194.
terminology.
I think we're using different terminology, but
Yeah.
in theory, and this is a downside, in my opinion, to the way that we have it designed, is organizations are a lot of things, and it gets confusing because we call everything organizations. But let me head back to here, and hopefully this will help. We'll go analytics, generate dimensions, organizations, data. So what we were just talking about
Okay,
was so this level is entity,
okay,
and this level is site. So this is similar to Bisense orgs today. So anybody underneath this entity will use their COA. Does that make sense?
so their allocations are set at the entity level,
Mhm.
and then all the sites under that, they have access to all those allocations.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Will the AEs be provided the format to submit to CGI to create a new entity? You talked about the different information that
Yeah.
well, initially we'll be setting them up. Are we going to have like the format in which you need the information?
I'm sure we will, just like we do with signer rules, right? Where it's like that little just list of bullet points that you have to fill out. But yeah, I can take that as a note to take away for what needs to be filled out, for sure.
And you said we're going to submit those on a Jira.
Yeah, I think that's the current plan.
Okay. Can the agency use fields be renamed? I'm sure we're going to get that question.
For right now, no. Conceptually within the solution, yes. So I think the easy answer is we're probably always going to keep the agency use 1 and 2. What we may end up doing is, let's say somebody wants a new field called format. I don't know, I just picked a random word. We'll add format as an allocation, and that's something that can be picked, and that will be the name that shows up. We have unfortunately not a lot of flexibility to change the labels at the allocation level dynamically. So we kind of have to have a static or a standard name, and then we expand from there. So does that answer your question?
Yes. Okay, if an agency requests to delete an address, what is the impact on purchase orders that were created with the original address? I know that's an issue currently.
So for that in particular, we probably have to do a little bit of testing, but my understanding is if I go in to the addresses.
John, addresses have status on them now.
No, I know. That's what I was going to get to. So you wouldn't really delete, you would set a status. So if I go to John demo entity. So what you would do in this case is you would set the status to deleted. And what that would mean is when you try to submit a new requisition using this address, it will yell at you and say, this is a deleted address, which I know we have that issue today. The difference is instead of being an overnight, you have to turn something back on with bulk load or however else you're editing addresses. Just the steps that I did, you could turn it on, allow them to process a change order, and then turn it off again. I know I've worked with a lot of you over the years to turn something on for a day or two, and then I go back into inspector and cut it back off. So hopefully that process will be easier, but we don't have it's not really going to be a different process within the system. It's just going to be a lot easier to manage if that issue arises.
Okay, and so that was my follow-up question. If I have a change order, then we have to go back and approve it, let them process the change order and then go back and delete it?
I believe so. And again, I can add a note to test that to be 100% sure.
I was
But that's my understanding.
I was wondering if it was going to give them an error message and prompt them to change it.
It will. I believe it will, because this is going to be deleted and you can't choose it on a new requisition, which effectively a change order is a new requisition. So it will say you can't choose this. You need to pick a different bill too, for instance.
And the AEs will have the ability to do that, correct?
Yep.
Okay. All right, and then another question on addresses. So who can add, delete, and edit addresses? Just the AEs and CGI, the entity level, the users will not be able to do that, correct?
Correct. It's data administrators, which is going to be you guys, AEs in most cases, and EVA admin and admin.
Okay.
So us.
Okay. When a user logs in for the first time and they have those general terms and conditions they have to accept, is that going to replace the EVA user acknowledgement form that we currently have?
It is the user acknowledgement form.
Okay, so they won't have to physically sign a form any longer.
Correct. Let me see. This is the one. I still need to put it in UAT. We were still testing in system test.
Yeah.
It's this
Okay.
guy.
All right. And my final question on P cards, and I know this is an issue with several agencies. So if the requisitioner needs to use another user's P card, but that user needs to approve the requisition, what is that process, or is there a process for that?
So there's a couple ways to do it. And I'll kind of walk you guys through the two different options. So the P card list, when you're creating a requisition, is either going to be the user who's logged in, which in this case is me. I don't think I have any P cards, or the requester. So they can create on behalf of someone to use their P card. That's one option. The other option is going to be if they're already in the workflow, then you just ask them to handle it. But otherwise, you would insert an ad hoc approver. And let's say Anne has the P card that needs to be used. We'll say after, I need to work on what happens when this is blank. But you would basically add them in as an ad hoc. And then when they access the requisition, when they come to this P card, they'll choose their P card and then approve. So that's kind of the process.
So they're either going to create it on behalf of the P card user that needs to approve it, or they're going to ad hoc them in.
Yep.
Okay, so if I'm the requisitioner, then that P card would need to be loaded into my profile for me to select it.
If you are, so you're
Sorry, John, Kimberly, you're not the P card owner, is that what you're saying?
Yes, so I'm going to create a requisition, but I need to use Bree's P card.
Yes.
I need to load it under my profile, or I'm going to create it on behalf of her.
You're going to create it on behalf of her. So you add her as an approver, sorry. You ad hoc her into the approval flow, please add your P card.
Oh, and then she would
And
add
then
her
she
P
can
card.
associate her card to your order at that time.
Oh,
Okay.
Everybody clear on that? Sorry, Sandy. Thank you. I'm glad you said.
and that's available to me because I'm gonna log in to do my approval.
As the ad hoc.
Right.
To do
Okay.
workbook.
And then you will have that option, Bree, to add your P card to that order.
Okay. And then Kimberly would only see the last 4 digits
Yes,
because it is encrypted.
because everything's encrypted. That's right. Sorry, John. Thank you.
oh no, you're good.
That's all I have.
See, Liz got a couple of And I think Felicia had a couple, right?
I had
I see
only,
you, great.
I had only one quick question, John.
Mhm.
You're adding a new agency. Can you set them up under the Manage tab or the Analytics tab or both? Because I saw you at the beginning going to both tabs.
So from a setting up the organization, the CGI task, I generally do it through analytics. It could be done through browse data. You guys wouldn't be doing any of that, so that's just more my view. Beyond that, when you're doing any managing, it should all be done within this manage. So you guys will kind of live within this drop down. You'll get your users, your addresses, rules, which we'll talk about after our break, the COA, and then the data beneath it.
Thank you.
Sure.
John, this is Felicia. My question, I had several questions. My question was about the emails that you set up when you created the email. When you created the organization. So can you have the same email, I guess, for multiple bill to, ship to addresses?
For bill to, ship to, yes, you can have as many as you need.
Now, does a user have to be associated with that email address? So can it be a user email address? And how would that affect the user, I guess, setting up an account, you know, for their personal profile or as a, since we're UAT, a test supplier?
So for addresses specifically, it is just a free text field.
Okay,
And so you can put whatever you need to. It has no association with anything within EVA. It's just a way to associate an email address to a billing or shipping address. That's it. So it doesn't have any additional functionality to say, hey, this needs to go one way or the other. If that makes sense.
okay, so what about with setting up the user profile? They have an email address. What happened to me last week is I went in and set up a supplier and used my email address and then was unable to access UAT.
Yeah, that's a different one. For sure, you cannot have duplicate emails anywhere within the system. If you do, when you log in, you'll get this wonderful, wonderful message that says, you can't log in. And then someone needs to come in and basically change one of your emails for one of your users slightly.
Okay, so what is your suggestion for setting up test suppliers?
Personally, I have about 15 different email accounts, like my personal and things like that. You could do a completely just made up email, which is probably going to be if you don't need to test specifically that the emails are going out, and instead of going in and checking, you know, your Gmail to see an email, you can actually come into this admin menu, and under technical support, you'll see notifications. And if we go here, you can actually see every notification that's sent from the system. So let's say you created an order that went out to a supplier. This is an example of exactly what one of those would be, right? This is an order delivery for a PO. You can see what the message would look like. You'll see that it went to your made up, like for instance, I guarantee this is a made up email address. But you can still verify the functionality, right? You can verify that the message looks the way it should look. You can check links, that sort of thing without actually creating a valid email. So if you're comfortable, the best process is using a personal or just any different email. If you're not comfortable with that, you can just do a made up one and navigate into this admin notifications area. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So how would you set up a organization that may be a cooperative contract? I know you had said that the EVA wide had to be checked in order for entities to be able to purchase off of DPS contracts. But what if you have an agency that has permission to purchase off of another agency's contract?
So in that case, it's actually going to be more in the contract setup. So when you're creating your contract itself, you can define who has access to buy for this contract. And so really at the contract level, they would choose additional organizations. So in this case, it was created created within Commonwealth Competition Commission. But let's say you want to share with my entity. You would do that at the contract level. And now I can see that contract and be able to buy off of it. So it's a little one and two hand, or I don't remember the phrasing, but anyways, yeah.
So in the profile, you won't, for that user, you won't have to set up, I mean, you won't have to select that agency or anything, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really only for situations like VCCS or shared service where maybe they need to, shared service might have access to all 26 or however many community colleges there are, right? In that case, you'd want to give them all of that access at their user level. But in the example you gave with like cooperative contracts, that would be really set up more at the contract level, and the user just belongs to, you know, my test entity. And now they can buy off of this.
Great. And then one more question back to P cards.
Okay.
Will the system automatically select P card if a supplier that they're using accepts P cards?
Not automatically, no. There is
So
not a.
you have to select P card on each order.
Mhm,
Okay.
as of right now.
Just Terry, I have a question. I may have misunderstood it, so I'll just say it and you correct me. So did I hear that the AEs can only see the entities they are assigned, or were you talking something else and I just put AE in there?
No, you will only be able to see what you were assigned. So you'll only, when you come to, for instance, this addresses table, you'll only see your organizations that you have available to you.
So what if the AE is out and someone is their backup?
Hold on,
Oh.
hold on, Mark's gonna answer. So everybody, all together now, that's not how it rolls today, right? So there's some setup today that is specific to the AEs, like, these are my 20 agencies that I'm responsible for, so I get requests that come from those agencies. But all of the account executives have access to all of the entities today.
Okay.
Right? So that is our expectation to best support the entities going forward. So we've been operating under that assumption anyway, is that we would have the access.
Yeah, because
Right.
I interpret it the same way as Terry. My agencies assigned to me are all I'm gonna have access to.
I heard that too, so
Okay.
it was on my list, so thank you,
Okay.
Terry, for asking that, but, well, yeah, so, because even I stick my hands in there sometimes. I know that's
And really that kind of comes back to, and just to kind of bring it full circle here, the organizational setup, right? So your users, if you have overview over multiple organizations, you would be setting up your organizational perimeter for your user, your AE user in here, so that you can kind of expand this list of what you have access to.
Now that is, John, if you could stay on that screen for a minute, that is one way that if there, for some reason, we wanted to limit, as opposed to everybody having access to all, is that we do it at the secretariat level. So the 3 locals would have all local, right? But then the rest of us would have the entities under our secretariat, if we felt like we needed to limit it. But I mean, we don't today, so.
Don't, because sometimes we have to go.
Yeah,
Outside of our secretary.
yes. Because when something comes to me, like we've had, for how many weeks, Hill was the lone ranger in education. So Kelly and I were both involved. So I would grab anybody that was available and help me with something if I needed.
So hey, John, this is Bree. I kind of have a follow on to Terry's question. You mentioned the AEs are going to be data admins versus you guys, CGI being admins. Are there any other differences other than that analytics tab that we won't have?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot.
Can you
But-
define what our role is within this as a data?
Yeah. Yeah, and let me kind of ask this question because maybe I'm just misremembering. For AEs, are you guys getting EVA admin? Do we remember, Barb, Shane, Mark? I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember. Okay, so if you guys are getting EVA admin, then you can see everything, which makes a lot more sense. Data admin is more for like if you want to give Dean at JMU the ability to manage his own data at JMU, you can give him data admin and he can only see what he's forced to see. So
So
if
that
you
is-
guys have EVA administrator, you can see a lot more.
Okay,
So
never
that
mind.
is, yeah, that is what happens today as well. So that's a good example, John. Thank you.
Okay, then my other question, John, is when you were showing the PO, TNC box where we can have the individualized terms and conditions,
Mhm.
free form box character limited.
If it is, it's massive.
Okay.
Like many thousands of words of character. If you find the limit, I'm curious to what it is. I'll put it like that.
Okay.
Any other questions? So this timed out pretty well for a nice 10 o'clock break. Now we can come back fresh with coffee maybe and talk about rules. Is anybody excited about rules?
Yeah, man.
Woohoo.
How long? 10, 15 minutes?
Sure. You want to do what, 10:10?
10.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys in a little bit.
Hey Barb,
Hey, Shane.
would you like to stop
Yeah.
this recording? And
Yes.
then